Hello everybody, it's Hidej. We'll be taking a look at another variation in pawn to 4e rapid engage. I did two videos regarding this strategy a couple of months ago, so here's the third one. In previous ones, we've learned the main variation of this strategy, that is from here. If we do a quick review, let me flip back a little from here. So this is a position you start the attack. So in pawn to 4e rapid engage, you push the pawn up to 4e, trying to open the bishop's diagonal, but white simply waits here and develop the castle. So now knight develops and white waits, and here black makes very important pawn push sack on 2d as a preparation for the later attack. You know, if white takes it, which is the one that we've seen in previous videos, now black can go for this fourth file, taking a pawn, silver recaptures another pawn drop on 4e, after which white will simply take it, accepting the silver and knight trade. So this is the primary variation of this strategy. So if you don't feel confident about those, you should go back to the previous videos and take a look at those. But today, what we're going to see today is here. Let's go back to here where black has pushed the pawn to 2d. Here's another way for white to deal with this attack, and that is bishop takes the pawn on 2d. A pretty tricky move, but this is actually a good move, you know. But let me note that this option for white to take the pawn with the bishop is only available when the gold has already moved to 6c, protecting the pawn. Because for instance, if he hasn't moved the gold yet, such as maybe knight to 7c instead of gold to 6c, well, in this case, black can actually take this bishop with the rook, making a rook-bishop trade now, and you see you can drop it to here, forking the rook and the pawn. So it's not really comfortable for white to go into that line. So this bishop's move is only possible when the gold has already moved to 6c like this, okay? So he takes with the bishop. So what should black do here? Okay, well, basically black takes the pawn on 4d now, and white will take it with the silver. Now here, the most natural way for black to do is actually pawn drop on 4e. So obviously white's silver can only go to 3c, keeping the bishop's diagonal closed. But you see the white's piece formation, the silver on 3c, bishop on 2d is kind of awkward position. You know, the bishop can't move at all, right? Because black's rook gonna penetrate the pawn. So what black will do now is develop the silver to 4g. White simply develops a knight here. Black develops another silver to 4f, putting pressure to white's camp. But actually, although white's piece formation is a little bit awkward, black can't pose any immediate further threat to white. So actually this position is pretty equal. So, you know, this is what usually happens if white takes the pawn on 2d. Yeah, this is the most natural sequence. However, what I'd like to discuss in this video is not about that, because actually there's another option for black to make things more violent. From here, earlier I dropped a pawn on 4e here, but there are some other options. You see any other pawn drops? Well, one you might be able to come up with would be pawn drop on 2b. Yeah, that's one option because, you know, the rook cannot take it because this silver is going to fall. So white basically has to let the knight escape 3c. Black can promote the pawn attack in the lance. But from here, now white will basically block the bishop's diagonal with this pawn push. Black can now take the lance, and white now goes for the knight's head. Black drops the lance to 2f, forking the bishop and pawn, but white actually ignores it and goes on pawn to 3f. So black takes the bishop, but white doesn't recapture. He keeps attacking this knight's head, but before he takes it, there's a very great pawn pawn sack on 4g. You can't take with the silver, bargain, promote, and attack the rook. So you have to take it with the gold and pawn promotion, silver recaptures, and knight to 4e, forking the silvers. So the material balance is good for black. He has gained the bishop actually, but the lance is doing nothing here. There's a heavy traffic jam on the second file, and white's knight has developed over here to 4e, forking the silvers. So this position is thought to be a little bit good for white actually. So the thing is, the pawn drop on 2b, this one is not the one that I want to talk about now. It's not the best move here. So now here's the pawn drop that we're going to focus in this video. It's this. It's pawn drop on 4c, attacking the rook. Now obviously the pawn is blocking the rook's defense on the silver, so white basically has to take it to protect the silver from the bishop's attack. And now what? Now the following moves for black is actually right. Black takes the bishop with the rook. Well, this book line is very famous. You're going to see why. Pawn recaptures, and of course bishop drops on 3b. White will basically have to move the rook to 4b, keeping this defense on the silver. So black takes the knight on 2a. So it seems black is doing pretty good, right? However, you're going to see this very famous move by white. It's a jouseki move. So why don't you pause the video here and analyze this position and see if you can come up with the jouseki move here. Okay, the answer is this famous jouseki move, rook drop on 4a, own camp rook drop. Yeah, now you can see that the horse is actually dead. It has nowhere to go to, right? But why not rook drop on 5a rather than piling those on this file? Well, in this case, black has this option of sacking this bishop on 4d, taking the silver. For one thing, taking the horse here is not very good because this bishop can promote attacking the rook. Rook has to run, for example, and look at this. The knight can now develop here, posing a great threat on the 5c square. Followed by horse to 4c, attacking both these squares. So taking the horse is not so good. So white basically recaptures the bishop with the rook. But look at this. The horse can now run to be attacking the rook, right? So black still has the initiative here. Rook has to run. Horse to 3c, threatening a silver drop on 4b. So white will drop a bishop, trying to get rid of that horse. Black accepts it, but another bishop drop on 3c. So you know that rook cannot go back to 4b because the silver drop here. I told you that. So actually white will play rook to 4a sideways. So black takes the rook recaptures, and maybe rook drop on 3a or maybe 2a. Well, in case of 2a, white can go for it. Nice hand. But anyway, this line is a little bit better for black actually. So that's why white doesn't drop the rook to 5a, and the correct jouseki move is actually 4a. Well, the reason is, in this case, if you sack this bishop now, this rook is still defending this rook. So horse to 2b won't be an initiative move here. White will get this turn. So that's why rook drop on 4a is thought to be better. Black can't sack the bishop on 4d. So what is black going to do here? Oh, well, what about horse to 1a? Giving up the horse. Rook recaptures and drop that lance on 4g. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. But white will calmly move the rook back to 4a, and it's not going to be so good for black. So you can't give up the horse here. So here's the jouseki move. Yeah, you only have this move. Knight drop on 3c. Attacking the rook and protecting the horse. Pretty interesting. And the silver can't take it because the bishop is protecting this knight indirectly. So now white has to move the rook over to 5a. So what are we going to do here? Black has to find a way to continue his attack here. because now the next great move for white is actually pawn push on 5e, blocking the bishop, thus threatening to take this knight. And also this pawn push is very powerful because of this rook's support. So black has to do something about this position. So what about now sacking the bishop? Well, white recaptures and maybe horse to 3b. Well, but then white will attack the horse. Horse has to run, and maybe bishop drop onto h. And it's not going to be so good for black. So sacking the bishop doesn't work here. So here's what it is. The only option for black here is actually go for the edge, pawn to 9e. Very interesting. And actually, white is not supposed to take this pawn. Well, the reason is if he takes it, land sack, and let's say he just simply takes it. Look at this. Black has now got a pawn, so you, of course, you know where you're going to drop it, right? Yeah, you can drop it on 4c, blocking the rook's protection on the silver. And now rook has to run and you win the silver. So it's not so comfortable for white to accept that. So actually, after that edge pawn push, white can't take it. So as I've said, white will actually block the bishop's diagonal with this pawn push. So black can only now take the pawn, putting great pressure on the king's head. And then white will, of course, takes this silver for free, thus once again attacking this horse. From here, bishop now takes the pawn on 5e, attacking the silver. And if white simply blocks it with a pawn, horse can get away to 6e. Yeah, because of this, the pawn is pinned. So, this line is pretty interesting, right? But, this position is still very difficult. It's almost equal position. Although this pawn on 4d is a great threat to black's king, the fact that the 7c square is already open for black's kings to escape later on, that's a big advantage for white. So it's still an equal position, okay? If white drops a pawn here to get away with the bishop, black will basically sack it here. Or maybe once run to here and sack it, making this option of knightly possible later on, maybe. So that's the very interesting variation of pawn 4e we haven't engaged. But now we have one more thing to cover, which is even more interesting. So actually we go back all the way to here where white has taken the bishop on to d. Well, in the move so far, black immediately captured this pawn on 4d, right? However, what about making that edge pawn sack now? Isn't that a great idea? If you push that pawn now, white can't accept losing that pawn, so white has to take it. That's the only option for white. And then let's do the same thing here. So in this case, that pawn push sack is already made. So that means if we go into the same line, knight drop, rook runs, and you can just take this pawn. So you can go into that line where you can take the silver here. Isn't that a great idea? Yeah, it works. It actually works. So if you're playing white, you have to branch off into some other variation after this pawn sack is made. One option here is after this knight drop on the 3c, instead of moving the rook over to 5a, white can now branch off into another line with silver takes 3c, giving up the silver. Black will take with the bishop, but rook sack here, silver recaptures, and you can take the horse on 2a. Well, white can do that because he has this advantage of passed pawn on 9e. So because he has an advantage here, he can go for a stronger line on the right side too, okay? Or alternatively, instead of this rook drop on 4a, white can now simply go for the attack with, for example, rook drop on 2i. Black only has a knight in his hand, so maybe he can just attack the rook from 3a. Rook runs and attack again, but here's a very good pawn drop on 4b. So it's a pretty difficult situation for black too, because this passed pawn is a pretty much threat to black. Okay, so I hope it's been useful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.